second scripture passage comes from the New Testament letter of Paul to the church in Corinth, 2 Corinthians chapter 6, beginning with verse 1. Again, listen for the word of the Lord. As we work together with him, in other words, with Christ, as we work together with him, we urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. For he says, at an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on a day of salvation I have helped you. See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation. We're putting no obstacle in anyone's way so that no fault may be found with our ministry. But as servants of God, we have commended ourselves in every way through great endurance in affliction and hardships, calamities, beatings, imprisonments, riots, labor, sleepless nights, hunger, by purity, knowledge, patience, kindness, holiness of spirit, genuine love, truthful speech, and the power of God, with the weapons of righteousness for the right hand and for the left, in honor and dishonor, in ill repute and good repute. We're treated as impostors, and yet are true, as unknown, and yet we are well known, as dying, and behold, we are alive, as punished, and yet not yet killed, as sorrowful, yet always rejoicing, as poor, and yet making many rich, as having nothing, yet possessing everything. We have spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open to you. There is no restriction on our affections, but only in yours. In return, I speak as to children. Open wide your hearts also. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The world seems to never stop having an appetite for movies about royal families. I mean, think about it. To name just a few that cover some of the historical and fictitious royal families, you've got The Crown, The Queen, The King's Speech, Princess Diaries 2, Young Victoria, Elizabeth, William and Kate, Harry and Meghan, Diana, Grace of Monaco, The Lion King, and Eddie Murphy's Coming to America 1 and 2. The world is fascinated with the dynamics of royal families. And I think that maybe it's because we understand two things. First of all, in the words of that great philosopher Mel Brooks, it's good to be king. And secondly, maybe as Shakespeare might put it, it's not easy being king. There's a struggle. Being king or queen or prince or princess and that whole royal court. So it's no surprise that the whole image of a royal struggle is going on between King Saul and that little shepherd boy, David. David and Saul, it's kind of a crazy story. I mean, literally, it gets crazy. Saul was old school. Once you were king, you were always king. You were blessed by God. You could do whatever you wanted. Yours was the right decision. And the world was ordered because of that. The kings and their families were over here, and the shepherds and their flocks were over there. They were separate. The royal family was up here, and the rest of the social pyramid was way down there. The king is the leader of the army of the Most High God, and everyone else stands back and says, ooh, how impressive. And the royal etiquette is set. The royal family acts in a regal way. They know how to hold their head and carry themselves and wear their clothes. I mean, it's like Downton Abbey all the time. But along comes this shepherd boy, and he's the one who leads the armies. He's the one who slays the giant. What was it that moved King Saul to invite David to stay and live with him at the palace? What was it? Was it an act of gratitude? Was it a way that Saul thought maybe he could control this charismatic young leader? Or was it that Saul was thinking like Don Corleone in The Godfather, keep your enemies close, or your friends close and your enemies closer? More and more, David keeps upstaging King Saul. And then David makes friends with Saul's eldest son, Jonathan. And I mean, these two are close. Jonathan thinks David is so incredible that he gives him his own armor. I mean, the son of the king gives the shepherd boy his own armor. And then he says that's not enough, so he takes off his prep school jacket, the one with the coat of arms on the breast pocket, and puts that around him and says, you look so good. Take my belt, take my pants, take it all. It's yours. You look so good. And Saul did not think that was the quite etiquette way to handle this situation. Saul's getting uncomfortable seeing his son sharing his royal wardrobe with the hired help. More than uncomfortable, he's starting to get angry. Now, about those light bulbs with the little bitty filament in them, the incandescent light bulbs, the electricity comes through and it's all fine on this fragile little wire, and that's what gives light. And then all of a sudden there's too much heat, too quickly, too much of a power surge, and the filament, you hear it, it's this little tink, and the thing is broken, and it's broken forever. And everything goes dark. I think that's what happened in Saul's mind. The filament between sanity and insanity, it got overheated. It got a surge of too much heat and anger, and it just went tink, and it took Saul over the edge. What was it that took him finally over the edge? I think it was David's guitar playing. I mean, David was a guitar player, right? And he was writing songs and singing songs. And there was one song that was at the top of the charts, and it was a song about the Goliath war. And the song had a hook in it that went, Saul has killed his thousands, and David has killed his tens of thousands. And I think that's got a grunge guitar right there. All right? It really is driving Saul crazy to hear this song. And then all of a sudden, David starts singing it in the royal court. And Saul's brain goes tink. And pandemonium ensues. Saul reaches over to the soldier on his left, and he grabs his spear and hurls it at David's guitar, and he misses. And he takes the spear on his right, and he hurls that at David's head, and he misses. It's okay, because David had 7 older brothers. He was very good at ducking objects thrown at his head. But Saul, mighty king, at that point becomes a basket case. A basket case. He just loses it. What's really going on? I mean, for Saul's old school. There is supposed to be order in the world. God has created the world orderly. From the beginning of Genesis, there is order, order, order. I mean, God is so Presbyterian, doing things decent and in order, right? But there's 2 moves in the Bible. There's 2 moves in the Bible about God. One, God knows that with order comes goodness, but also in a human world, in a world of sin, that the order can become corrupted. And when that order becomes corrupted, God has the freedom to do something new, to make a new creation. God was doing a new thing, and King Saul, for all of his gifts, for all of his potential, had become corrupt. And he was not ready for God to do a new thing. And so when it began, it just drove him crazy. And Saul ended up going from God's anointed to being something of a joke, or maybe more carefully, something of a truly tragic figure, a Shakespearean tragic figure, because he was not willing to listen to God doing a new thing. You know, to tell the truth, I think I saw King Saul not long ago at a doctor's office. He was sitting in the waiting room. He was spouting off from his chair there in the waiting room like it was a throne, loud enough for the entire waiting room to hear, complaining about all that was wrong with the world and how corrupt it was and how everything was bad. And since he was speaking loud enough for everyone to hear, I decided that maybe I could go soothe his troubled mind. So I went over to talk with him. Okay, I didn't go to soothe his mind. I went to correct him. Or at least give him some other ideas to think about. And so we talked there in the waiting room. We did not agree on much, but we had a civil conversation. And he got down to the end of why he was there in that particular waiting room. And he shared that he had been rejected from his last doctor's practice for saying things that made the staff feel uncomfortable, saying sexist things that were offensive. And when I heard that, I had a new sense of poignancy and compassion for this man, because I saw God was doing something new in the world, slowly teaching us about a world that is less and less sexist. But this man had not been paying attention to what God was doing. And like King Saul, he liked it the old way. But God was doing something new. King Saul is a tragic figure, a Shakespearean tragic figure. He has all the gifts in the world, but he will not see what God is teaching him. So how does this story inform us? I think sometimes the best way to read a Bible story is to not put ourselves mentally in the role of the hero, but to put ourselves in the role of the one who needs to learn the lesson. So maybe we all, me included, are like King Saul. Maybe we've been royalty for a long time and life has been easy and we've been at the top of the pyramid. And then along comes this little bitty microscopic coronavirus, and it's made us hide in our castles, and it's cut down our economy and cut off our relationships. And maybe we've ended up from all that time apart, maybe we've ended up angry, or maybe, like Saul, a little bit crazy. Do you feel a little bit crazy coming out of that year of being alone? How can this be happening to us? We're the chosen ones. But the deeper question is God doing a new thing in the world? Is God doing a new thing in the world? Another way of putting that is, what do we have to learn after a year in which the whole world was threatened by one little virus? What else do we need to learn about living together in a vulnerable planet? This last year has been, some of it's been refreshing. It's been kind of quiet. We've been able to read and catch up on more TV shows than we ever knew were even out there. But it's also been stressful to be so far apart, from people, to not be able to be with one another. I find myself just tremendously moved just hearing you sing this morning. I haven't felt that power in so much time. It's beautiful. It's beautiful and kind of scary to be with people of such beauty. I know there's some people that are vaccinated and some are not. And, I think that's an image of some of the mixed messages that we have inside and outside of what is going to make us more safe. And when do we come out? We miss one another, and yet we've been locked away from each other. And maybe the answer to our situation right now, where it's it's kind of difficult for maybe all of us to come out again is to listen to that passage from 2 Corinthians, where the whole passage is saying something on the order of, have some grace with one another. Have some grace with one another, because we all feel kind of raw, kind of exhausted, like we're stepping into a new reality. It's been an emotionally difficult time. It's been a traumatic time, for some far more than others. It's been a difficult time and we feel raw. And if some people want to keep on being distant, that's a reasonable thing for them to do. And if some people are ready to come out and engage others, well, that's a reasonable thing to do too. If someone wants to keep wearing a mask, go for it, please do. If somebody wants to take theirs off, I think it's a reasonable time to do that. You see, 2 Corinthians is about grace, and another word for grace in the Bible is reconciliation. Reconciliation, one of the most profound words, life-transforming words in the Bible. It's about making faith real when you reconcile with the world, because God has reconciled with us. Real Christian work is about recognizing how God has sacrificed for us, how God has loved us, the grace that God has given to us. And having been given so much grace, we're set free to be graceful people, to play our part in this divine drama. Because as this passage today really makes clear, it's not that you're saved once and for all. It's not that you're reconciled once and for all. The beauty of that whole concept of reconciliation is now is the day. Now is the time. And the question is, how am I going to be graceful today? How am I going to be a power for reconciliation today? Now is the day of salvation, the text says, meaning how can we be graceful today? How can we be graceful recognizing that God is doing something new? How can we respond not only to God in that newness, but how do we reshape ourselves in the midst of that newness to enter into new relationships with other people, to have some conversations that might be hard conversations but need to happen, to embrace the newness? How can we open our minds to hear the newness? Paul talks about all that he had to suffer, the external adversities, the abuse, the difficulties, but Paul keeps on working for reconciliation because God keeps on working for reconciliation in him. And reconciliation has two major moves. One, it might mean bringing people together again. There has been a rupture, and what you're doing in reconciliation is bringing people together again. In other words, recreating the old order. That's one meaning of reconciliation. And the other meaning of reconciliation is God is doing something new. So be part of the newness. And that's how we can be reconciled too. So which one is it? Is it the order and the reordering? Or is it the new creation and the new relations? It's something we need to discern. So Paul gives us this list of norms of behavior in the midst of trying to discern what is going on. He says, first of all, purity. It has to do with asking, what's your real motivation when you're doing what you're doing? What's your real motivation? Be honest with yourself. Make sure your motives are pure. Secondly, knowledge. Knowledge in terms of a deep understanding of what's going on in the world. It's not just one form of scientific knowledge or one form of theological knowledge. It's kind of putting it all together into a sense of wisdom about what is going on in the world and how is God expecting us to respond. That's the knowledge that we need to seek for. Forbearance, that has to do with saying, yeah, when people act crazy, don't lose your cool. You notice the stories in the in the news day after day about all these people who are just kind of going tink, losing their cool on airplanes or in all these different settings. Forbearance means have some grace. Have some grace with the people around you. They have gone through so much, and who knows how crazy they feel because of it. Have some grace with them. And that's part of being God's reconciling agent. He goes on to say, have kindness and genuine love and truthful speech. You know, some people love to say something harshly and then say, well, I just shoot from the hip. I call them like I see them. It's like, no, you're just mean. Graceful speech is about the hard work of saying, how can I say something that is truthful, but how can I say it in a way so that someone feels blessed with what I have told them, the truth that I've shared, or at least they understand why I'm saying what I'm saying. It's the truth spoken in love in ways that are respectful. If you want to heal, use a scalpel, not a machete. The truth spoken in love. What other norms of behavior do we need now, in this day and this time? I think this is a time when we're all kind of learning what it is to come out from our cave after having been there for over a year. We have to figure out again, talk with one another again. What are the norms of behavior? What are the ways that we're going to act with one another that can truly bless one another so that we can live together, so we don't end up in a world gone crazy trying to hold back the new reality that God is giving us. We have now opened our doors. And now the scripture says we need to practice opening our hearts. Opening our hearts to one another, opening our hearts to the world, opening ourselves for the new day that God has given to us today. Amen.
Thanks for watching our video. Make sure to subscribe to get the latest and greatest videos from the Old Stone Church. And if you feel blessed by our message, please go to theoldstonechurch.org and click to donate. God bless you today and forever. The Old Stone Church. We've been loving Christ and serving City since 1820.